The finance minister Nirmala Sitharaman recently made an announcement on a small change in GST on used cars, and it got everyone talking. But is it really important for you? Especially, and why did the finance minister decide to introduce this, especially at a time where a huge amount of unsold inventory lays stagnant in dealerships across this country? And what does this mean for your decision to buy your next car? Let's break this down. One of life's realities, right? Death and taxes are inevitable. We've all heard this, but it's only when we grow up and we start paying taxes ourselves is what we realize the depth of this statement. So it's also always in the best interest for both people and the government if taxes are also simple. They're a necessary part of country building, and if you make the taxes simple, people are more likely to pay them, but also it makes it easier for the governments to understand how much cash flow are they generating for each particular tax. And the Indian government actually realized this, right? So they removed the old cluttered system of VAT, cess, surcharge, local taxes, and all of that with a single unified system called the GST, or the Goods and Services Tax. Now, a lot of us might be led to believe that the finance minister Nirmala Sitharaman is the only person who is responsible for setting these GST rates, but that is not the case. You see, the GST is headed by a body called the GST Council and consists of finance ministers from every state coming together to decide on the rates for each particular item under the GST regime. This is to make sure that people across the country and governments across the country, whether it's regional and the central, are all aligned on the amount of money that is going to be taxed from the citizens of the country under the GST regime for different products. It's sort of like democracy in action. Lever for deciding the government's interest and policy interventions, right? So let's say a government does not want to encourage a particular sector, they can choose to increase the tax rate on that particular sector to an extent where people find it more expensive to buy products from that sector, and as a result, the consumption of those products decreases. Similarly, if a government wants to actually encourage a sector, they might actually give subsidies or drop the tax rate on that sector so that the end customers' costs also get reduced and more people are able to afford products from that particular sector. Take, for example, the recent GST hike on used car sales. The government recently increased it to 18% across all categories. Right at a time when the automobile industry in India is facing a month-long deadlock. So, is this GST being used for collecting taxes, or is this a policy intervention in disguise? Let's find out. Contributes 7% of India's GDP, but more importantly, it is 80% of India's manufacturing GDP. In fact, in 2022, India became the world's third largest automobile market, beating Japan with 5 million vehicles sold. And this obviously gives ambitions, right? So the government, in a press information release, actually mentioned that they want to double the size of this industry by the end of 2024. And we see this all across our daily lives, right? You look at companies like Tata Motors and Mahindra, they have gone abroad and started acquiring global brands like Jaguar, Land Rover and SsangYong. Even Indian two-wheelers are right at there. TVS recently acquired the famous Norton motorcycle brand, and Royal Enfield, one of the biggest brands in India, is actually originally a British brand. So all of this is part of India's large Make in India vision. Actually a little bit different. In the second quarter of 2024, India's economic growth slowed down to 5.4%, and the worst hit is probably our automobile sector, with a staggering 800,000 vehicles remaining unsold in dealerships across the country, totaling almost $10 billion. You see, rising food inflation, stagnant wages, and newer consumer behavior patterns have led to a situation where most people are actually not that excited about buying new cars anymore. gravitating towards used cars. Now, apart from these few organized players, the majority of used car dealers are actually small businesses run by families who operate at a very thin margin. The reason being, they have to first purchase a car, then they have to do some minor repairs, maybe run a fresh coat of paint, fix a few dents, and do a thorough checkup of the internal mechanical parts as well. After all of this, the customer actually expects the price of the car to be at a certain level, otherwise, they might just prefer a new car. So, these operators actually always had a margin of maybe 10% at best, and this new change in GST regime means that either they will have to pass this cost back to the consumer, or they will have to reduce their margin by up to 6%, which may not always be feasible. So, bringing it in at a time like this does beg the question, what exactly is the government hoping to achieve, and is that going to probably make a difference in your consideration to buy your next car? Do you think it's a move to actually help the new car industry, which is the large manufacturers, sell more cars which are lying unsold, or is it just a way for the government to nudge the customers to not go for used cars? That's the question.